Welcome back to That Time When. Well, the last few episodes I've been focusing on supernova guests that I've sat down with. This one today is very exciting. If you've clicked the link, you know what this one's all about. Mr. Richard Dean Anderson is going to be joining me. The three greatest names in television, as I said on the previous episode to Tori. I got to sit down with him, which was absolutely fantastic. Trekzone and the Brisbane Times were the only people to interview him when he was here in Brisbane for Oz Comic Con a few years ago.
Taking you back through the library of Trekzone on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and YouTube. That Time When.
Welcome to the Trekzone Spotlight. Matt Miller with you. Oz Comic Con in Brisbane this weekend is playing host to the three greatest names in television. Richard Dean Anderson, welcome to Australia and thanks so much for your time.
My pleasure.
Your first acting role was on General Hospital before 7 seasons on MacGyver. What was your favourite invention?
You'd think I'd have a favorite by now. I know the one that gets torn apart the most, and certainly has been, by Mythbusters. I think it's only my favorite because it was so absurd that there's no way that we could have made an ultralight out of bamboo and a motorcycle engine, and just all the weight that was involved. And Mythbusters did an episode and tore it apart. Ours, of course, dipped down below the horizon and then came up, and we flew away from the bad guys. The real one that they made just went down straight into the ground below.
Of course, somewhere in the world, MacGyver is in reruns. Are you surprised it's still on TV some 20-odd years later?
Not so much. I mean, objectively, I can see why it draws a crowd kind of perpetually, because the concept was unique to television at the time, in that we had a TV hero that was willing to think his way logically out of a situation or solve a problem. And at the time, in the mid-'80s, all you really had were shoot 'em up, bang bang shows like A-Team and others. There was a uniqueness to the franchise, and I think the philosophy of the show was such that there was something universal about the lessons that we were presenting. I don't think it'll ever really go out of fashion. Although, if you look very closely, you can see just how much of an 80s show it was. You'll notice the mullet.
Do you miss the mullet?
I don't at all. No, I think the mullet for me it was an accident, because I always had long hair, but at the time, I think one of the producers, Henry Winkler, was one of my bosses, and he might have asked me to get a little trim at one point. I could be making this up, I'm not quite sure. But my hair was long, so I just trimmed it on the side and put it behind my ears primarily, but left all this long, and it was just, of course, became, the ugliest haircut known to man. And quite an embarrassing thing to look at in retrospect.
Now, Trekzone.org is a Star Trek fan site, of course, but bear with me because I found a degree of separation between you and the fan-tries. In 1995, you executive produced and starred in Legend, a 12-episode comic series that starred Star Trek alumni John Delancey. Do you remember working with him?
God, yes. Well, I hired him, for God's sake. I was co-executive producing the show. I remember having to run auditions for the role, and I hadn't really thought of Delancey too much for the role. I didn't know him at all, to be honest, but he came in, and just in our conversation, I could tell that we were going to have a rapport. And he wasn't particularly stellar in the audition, but that even gave me more respect for him and grew to love him. And his take on the Tesla character that Bartok, in other words, for us in Legend, we became so tight and just had so much fun.
Are you watching us on YouTube? Click the link in the description to catch this interview in full now. Maybe you're listening to us on your favorite podcast app. Then beam over to our official watch page and click the link there. Keep up to date with Twitter. Catch new podcasts daily on YouTube. Plus, we're beaming to your favorite podcast app 5 days a week. Just search for Trekzone and subscribe.